The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Welcome in, everybody. It's Keefer and Kurre, our weekly journey through whatever fascinates Tony Kurre and myself. And we are glad that you are on board. It's going to be a great discussion today. It's going to be more of a local flavor. We generally kind of branch out and cover all corners of the globe. We're like the modern day wide world of sports, spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sports.
Yes.
We're going to keep it close to home, Tony, because there's an event and a lot of activity going on the west side of town that I think is phenomenal, as Rickwood Field, the oldest continuing baseball stadium in the United States, opened first in August 1910, is actually going to have a huge remodel, refurbishment, and host an actual regular season Major League Baseball game on June 20th of this coming year, 2024. It'll be the St. Louis Cardinals coming to Birmingham to play the San Francisco Giants. And the honoree is one gentleman by the name of Willie Mays from Westfield, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham. How about that, Apple?
A guy that is known to have one of the greatest catches in Major League Baseball history over the shoulder. There's no doubt. And of course, that seems like it's a top 10 almost every single night. But yeah, you talk about some of the players that have just played there. Every time I do any research, and of course, I've been out to Rickwood several times when the Barons used to play an annual game out there. But when you walk through the hollowed halls of that stadium and realize that you're walking the same stadium that Hank Aaron played in, or Mel Allen, or Ernie Banks, or Yogi Berra, or Roberto Clemente, or Ty Cobb, Dizzy Dean, Joe DiMaggio, Rollie Fingers with the handlebar mustache. I used to love him with the A's. Lou Gehrig, Reggie Jackson, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays. You mentioned Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson. We can go on and on and on.
Amazing.
I cannot think of another ballpark. Even if there was an older one, I can't think of a ballpark that had that much steeped legendary status to it. And it's just going to be a fantastic game saluting the Negro League. It's going to be awesome on June 20th, 2024.
Yeah, it's great. And, you know, all of the great Negro League players played there, because in a time of racial division and segregation, it's kind of remarkable to me that ballpark was the host not only of the Birmingham Barons in the what was called Southern Association, which morphed into the Southern League, but the Birmingham Black Barons called the Rickwood Field their home all through that period. I don't think there was a lot of crossover in terms of culture, so I find that remarkable in a city that's still stained by the legacy of great racial duress and conflict that Rickwood Field, from the day it opened in 1910, served the dual purpose of hosting both those kind of leagues. And actually, the Negro League was a top-level professional league, where the Southern League was a minor league. So arguably, the Black Barons were certainly a more accomplished franchise. As you think of players that played in those leagues, guys like Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson, who old-timers will tell you was maybe the greatest natural hitter to ever play the game, and he never got a chance to play in the major leagues. And also probably the most famous player of all time in Negro League Baseball, Satchel Paige, pitched many games at Rickwood Field. So like you said, when you go there and you walk around and you kind of appreciate everything that's happened in the 113-year run of that stadium, it's really remarkable. What a gem for Birmingham.
It's amazing, too, that stadium was built back in 1910, you mentioned, finished in 1910 for $75,000.
$75,000.
$75,000 it cost to build Rickwood Field. But then you're also talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates actually used it for a spring training season one year.
Yep.
You had the Crimson Tide play their home games there from 1912 to 1927. A lot of people aren't aware of that, which is amazing. They played their home football games there. And of course, Rickwood was hit by a tornado in 1912, knocking down the outdoor fence. And also, of course, a movie that a lot of people that were in Birmingham at the time got a chance to actually be extras for, the Cobb movie with Tommy Lee Jones I'll never forget Jimmy Buffett had a bit part in that movie where he was actually yelling at Ty Cobb, and Ty Cobb came up in the stadium and beat the hell out of him after he was being heckled. And then, of course, Jimmy Buffett, after he had that bit part, actually played a free show on the back of a flatbed truck out in the outfield for all the extras for that particular game. And I actually own the hat that Tommy Lee Jones wore with the big D on it for the Detroit Tigers. I actually own the hat that he wore during that movie. He actually flipped it out into the crowd, and a good friend of mine caught that hat, had it autographed, and she gave it to me just a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact. So
how cool is that?
Yeah, so I've got that hat. It's amazing. You wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to share that story, but I actually have the hat that Tommy Lee Jones actually wore in that movie. So, yeah, just so much history. And, I don't think people realize, and you talked briefly before we actually started the show, about, city council and the mayor and everyone else around Birmingham trying to make this city a better place. We've been stuck in the mud for so long. And I really start seeing it. It all started with the Uptown area, now Protective Life Stadium, and all the wonderful things that I have to give kudos where kudos are due and credited. But to land this ball game, I don't care how it got done and who was responsible for it, but what a huge get for Birmingham. Anytime we can get on a stage of this magnitude, and have a Major League Baseball game here is just going to be fantastic.
I agree. And, it's funny because Rickwood Field was really a spark when I was doing conventional news talk radio. My son at the time, who was in high school, was on a summer league travel baseball team, and they played back-to-back days in Rickwood Field as part of a tournament. And I soaked that up. I had been there a couple of times with the late, great original WJOX personality, Ben Cook, who was on the committee called Friends of Rickwood.
Yep.
And it was a small group of guys that were committed to baseball history and Rickwood Field. And these guys worked tirelessly. And when I say worked, they didn't just raise money. These guys were out there tending to the field and painting. And I mean, the devotion they had to that ballpark was amazing. Ben took me out a couple of times and got to throw off the mound, which was thrilling and really kind of soak it up. But when Clayton played in that tournament for a couple of days, I did a lot of walk. And I know you've described that you've done the same thing. Just walking around into the nooks and crannies and corridors because it's wide open while events are going on. And it was just amazing. Went up, the press box was open. It wasn't occupied, but there were just tons of framed pictures of all the great players that had played there. And my father-in-law at the time had befriended up in Memphis a guy by the name of Joe Scott, who played for the Memphis Red Sox and the old some of the old franchises in the Negro Leagues, and had about a 20-year career. And Joe Scott, in the era where Negro League baseball was finally being recognized, really jumped on the bandwagon. He showed up in just about every park for every event. The last 10 years of his life, Joe was just a rock star. He didn't have a great career batting average, as it was pointed out to him one night by a friend of mine, 245. And he said, well, we didn't keep very good statistics those days. Don't be fooled. But Joe was the ultimate self-promoter. But I was so delighted to see a framed picture of Joe B. Scott in the booth up there with all of the other greats. And he signed it like he signed everything else. Yours in sports, Joe Scott, just a great guy that I was really privileged to know, and was thrilled to see he was amongst the rafters there. But real quick, Tony, I also found it fascinating that stadium was originally commissioned and built by a 26-year-old entrepreneur here in Birmingham, Rick Woodward, hence the Rickwood Field. And Rick Woodward went to Connie Mack, the iconic major league owner and manager for the Philadelphia Athletics for over 50 years, for advice on how to build the ballpark. And it was the first concrete and steel minor league stadium ever constructed. Pretty fascinating things. And when it opened in 1910, he invited all the luminaries, including, you can't make this stuff up, the governor of Alabama at that time, which a lot of people would probably think was Kay Ivey, but that was just before Kay's time. But they played the Montgomery Climbers in the very first game They won 3-2. I thought maybe Kay Ivey had a tie-in because her favorite slogan, "There's no step too high for a high stepper." So maybe that's why the Climbers were from Montgomery. But it was 3-2. The real governor at the time, though, was Braxton Bragg Comer, named after the Civil War general. That's how closely removed this park was to that calamitous event. And the mayor of Birmingham, again, you can't, these are like literary characters out of a long time ago book. The mayor of Birmingham was Culpeper Exum. So those guys were on hand with all the other luminaries. What a special day.
Yeah, and I want to say that I want to say Rickwood holds about 12,000. Am I right there?
Thanks the current capacity.
Yeah, so and I don't know if they're going to be adding seats or not. And there's two things that I'm a little concerned about, and I love the fact that they're obviously Major League Baseball is enveloping this idea of bringing a Major League Baseball game. But I know they're changing a lot of things, and you can feel, I saw some friends of Rickwood actually talking about some of the changes with a tear in their eye because they're so used to having that natural grass. They're going to be ripping up all the grass. They're going to be putting in a drainage system. Of course, obviously, they're going to have to make a lot of safety protocols to the stadium to make sure that the netting is going to be added up and down the left and right field lines. And I don't want to screw up the mystique of what Rickwood Field, as I remember it, and as I look at it, as it sits there in the Rising West Princeton neighborhood, I want to make sure it still keeps its charm. I don't want it to look too much like 2023. And I know we talked about this a couple of days ago when we were discussing what we were going to talk about today, but I hope they don't contemporaryize it too much. You know what I'm saying? I want it to look like, I realize that the structure and the bones are going to stay the same, but I don't want it to look too much like Major League Baseball. You know what I'm saying? I want it to look like it's back in 1910.
Because that's the charm of it. And we talked about Birmingham not being a very ambitious city in terms of getting kind of left behind. And that the most striking example of that tournament I talked about where my son played a couple of days, which still was a thrilling memory for me to see him out there patrolling the outfield where Reggie Jackson and so many greats that we talked about, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, that to play in the same outfield. I kept trying to impress upon him how cool that was. But the stadium that year, and this, again, the Friends of Rickwood, these guys, Tony, unbelievable job of keeping that place, in up and running.
They really kept that stadium. I mean, there was talk about demolishing that stadium for a long period of time.
Oh, of course.
And it was a grassroots situation. And you mentioned Ben Cook. I couldn't think of a better guy to run that organization because, man, if Ben Cook was part of it, he loved baseball more than anything in the world.
Oh, he did. He was great. So, I mean, somebody said in a conversation in Atlanta a couple weeks ago that, Fenway Park was the oldest baseball park. And I said, not so fast, my friend. Fenway opened in 1912. Mm-hmm. Rickwood Field opened in 1910. But that tournament I was talking about today, they had restored it to exactly how it looked. And they do it by photos, but they had restored it to exactly how the stadium looked in 1948, the week that we were there. And the out-of-town scoreboard to me was just so telltale because it had the Southern League schedule from a day in July of 1948 out on the out-of-town scoreboard. Of course, there weren't any current scores because I guess those games have been in the books for a while. Mm-hmm. But I was really struck by the other cities on the out-of-town scoreboard for a Southern League weekday afternoon. And it was Atlanta and Charlotte and Nashville and Memphis and New Orleans. Yeah. And I was really struck by the fact, and there was some others, Little Rock and some others, but I was really struck by the fact of how many of those cities have become major metropolis locations with numerous professional sports franchises. And here's Birmingham still kind of plodding along. It really wasn't much removed from 1948. And I think that's kind of an indictment about the attitude and the whole kind of attitude of trying to preserve something and not let the city get too big. So I think all that's consistent with what you're saying, because it really came down to, and we don't need to get into a history lesson here, but when the decision was made by the transportation folks and the major airlines that a massive airport needed to be built in this part of the country that was growing rapidly, Birmingham was actually the geographic favorite, but Birmingham didn't pursue it actively. Atlanta did, and the rest is history.
And now, of course, that's the busiest airport, not only just in the United States, but also the world. It's amazing, too, because, you talk about Birmingham being kind of stuck in its own ways. I mean, we're one of, 3 states that don't have a lottery. We don't have legal marijuana. We don't have all these things that are so progressive around the world. But you know what? There's some things that we get stuck in our ways, and that's a good thing. And because of that, I think that's why we still have Rickwood Field sitting there in the Rising West area. And it's amazing, too, because when you go see the ballpark, I would be interested to see what percentage of people that live within 50 miles of Birmingham have actually ever seen Rickwood. It's not something you drive by. It's not near a major thoroughfare. It is a ballpark. It's like going to Spain Park. I mean, you have to pull in, and go find an area to park. But I implore this town, whenever we have a Bruce Springsteen concert or a Jimmy Buffett concert or a Garth Brooks concert, you will have a multitude of fans who aren't big fans of that particular artist, but that want to be part of the scene, want to be part of the party. And I implore people that aren't big baseball fans to please stay away from this game. So the people who are purists, who know what baseball means and how historical this game is going to be, give us an opportunity to get those tickets so we can actually see this game. I want it to be a celebration, and I would like to think that 500,000 people are going to show up and tailgate outside this ballpark. But I hope that it keeps its decency and its simplistic and its beauty as far as in its historical references for this particular game. And that's kind of what I meant about Major League Baseball coming in and ripping up I'd love to go out there and own a piece of that grass. I just hope it keeps its charm. You know what I mean? Because even the Field of Dreams game. And by the way, they're using this as the Field of Dreams game, but they're actually going to rebrand it because there are no corn stalks and it's not in Iowa. Yeah. And I understand that. And because of that, and because of the rebranding, I do think there's an opportunity that we may have a game played there every year. I know they haven't spoken about that, but if they pull it off and it goes really, really well, and I can't help but think that on television this is going to look incredible. I think it's going to look fantastic. And I'm not sure who's going to be actually calling the game, but I could imagine a Joe Buck, who's a historian in his own right, would absolutely just get off on calling a ball game there just from a historical reference.
Or Bob Costas.
Or Bob Costas, yes.
I'm sure there's going to be quite a clamor of people that are wanting to be involved in that, because the history of baseball is such a, let's face it, baseball is the ultimate game based on numbers and stats and just really, kind of remember James Earl Jones playing in Field of Dreams, the movie that, of course, the field and the game recently has been based on. But he says, America has moved along like a steaming freight train, but there's always been baseball.
Yep.
That stirring speech before he walks through the cornfields with Ty Cobb and the rest of the fellas, not with Ty Cobb, I'm sorry, with Shoeless Joe Jackson. They make fun of Ty Cobb in that movie. Remember the great line where Joe Jackson says, "You can't believe how many guys wanted to come here and play." Yeah. Ty Cobb wanted to play, but we hated that son of a bitch when he was alive until he was ticket.
Absolutely.
So, love that stuff. And the other correlation is, I think Birmingham has a great opportunity to kind of tie this in with the whole celebration of Negro League baseball, because it's a stain on Major League Baseball and our society in general that black players were not allowed to play in the Major League. And Tony, do you realize that from 1887, where that was basically instituted, all the way to when Jackie Robinson appeared in this first game in 1947, it was not an actual rule. It was never written. Mm-mm. It was never officially on the books in clear language that blacks were not allowed to play in the major leagues. It was and this is a term that makes my stomach turn, a quote, gentleman's agreement amongst the owners and the powers that be in baseball. And it just deprived the game of so many amazing stars. I mentioned Satchel Paige before, when he finally, when the color barrier was broken by Jackie Robinson At 43 years old, Satchel Paige got his first chance to pitch a game in the major leagues for the Cleveland Indians, and he threw a shutout in his very first game. I mean, the guys that played in that league all those years, and it was very, very popular. It was a major a source of pride for a lot of Black Americans at the time that didn't have a lot of those outlets. Negro baseball thrived for a long time, and we call it that. If there's any modern day kids listening that say that's an offensive term, that's what the league was called. So we're not disparaging anyone. In fact, I think the rich history and celebration of Negro League baseball needs to be totally the level of interest. And I think at Birmingham, I know there's some plans to eventually maybe build a museum to Southern baseball overall at Rickwood. And I think that would kind of ensure that this could become an annual event. And how exciting to have a regular season major league game in our town.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. And I know that a lot of people look at Rickwood already as a museum. And it's funny because when you pull up their site, it says, please do not enter to the stadium without permission. I mean, that's how accessible the stadium is. You can drive out there and actually walk
like a little
around.
league park, but
it really is. I mean, they actually, please ask us before you walk the ballpark. I will say this too, and I want you to explain this a little bit because I know you've been out there quite a bit, and I have as well. You will go out there, you will see old advertising signs. You will see advertising from the early 1900s. And obviously when the Birmingham Barons used to play their home games out there, I don't think people just realized just the historical references that played into that. And we really miss that. I mean, obviously they have this new fangled ballpark that's now been open. It's hard to believe 10 years already downtown, which has just been an absolute crown or jewel in the crown of Birmingham down there. And of course it's used with the big Birmingham on the side there as you come into the ballpark. I know the Barons are super happy that. Of course, I think about Art Clarkson and some of the great owners that have been part of the Barons. But talk about just a little bit, because the first time you see that ballpark, you're not really sure what you're going to go to. If you've been to Fenway, you realize how small some of the media rooms are. It is hot. They instilled, I guess, electric fans that actually blew through Rickwood. I want to say that was the mid-teens when the owner said, "Hey, listen, it's a little too warm in here because the air is absolutely still the way it's set up." But since we're on the radio and we're doing a podcast here, and by the way, you can hear this at least 5 times a week on the TKR app and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're available everywhere. It's the Keefer and Kurre show here on TKR. Tell people what they can expect when they walk in. Certainly when you're talking about 12 or 13,000 people, you're not talking about, and I know they're making ballparks a lot smaller now, so it's more intimate. One of those reasons is they want more sellouts. So as opposed to those cookie cutter 70 stadiums where you could get 56 to 60,000 people in a ballpark, they were always half empty. Now 35 to 40,000 are much like the new ballpark for the Birmingham Barons is setting up. It makes it for a much better ball game. But tell people what they can expect when they walk into Rickwood.
It really strikes you because the first thing you realize is the old time design. Picture a major league stadium where a guy fouls one back and it goes up into the rafters, rattles around, and comes out on the parking lot at the other side. Yep, that's the first thing that struck me was the fact that there's and I think they have what a lot of the old timey parks have, which was kind of an opening between the roof and the top of the stands. And at times, because of the sun getting so bad, a lot of those old-time parks, including Rickwood at one time, and I don't know how many of them are still there. I haven't been in the last 4 or 5 years, but they had these louvers that could be opened and closed depending on what the conditions were to keep the blinding sun from affecting the game. But the first thing that strikes you, the same thing that struck me when I went to Fenway, was damn, people in the early part of the last century were a lot smaller now because you can barely fit our ample derrieres into the tiny seats. And I know Major League Baseball is coming in, and that's another thing. And yes, the fear of them overdoing it and taking away that nostalgia from the stadium is real. And I'm sure that they're going to be operating, trying to avoid that as much as possible. But they are putting millions of dollars into the improvement here, a brand new state-of-the-art lighting system, which is interesting. Rickwood was one of the first stadiums in the country to have, or was the first minor league stadium certainly to have giant steel pole lighting installed in somewhere around the late teens. So they were very innovative and progressive in that ballpark. But I think the first thing that's going to strike everybody too is they've got to put netting in. I guess they just kind of wing it and get away with it for the one minor league game a year that's played there. But even college games, if you're a spectator, you better be on your toes because there's no foul territory hardly at all. If you're sitting behind the third base dugout, you better bring your glove because you're right in the game, buddy. It is so close. The sight lines are so close. And I think that's the first thing that's going to strike people is that, gosh, high school football stadiums in Texas are 3 times this size, places that your kids play. So it's very intimate. It's very compact. And there's a lot of seats crammed into a little bit of space. And we're a little more sizable than back in the day. So it's not the most comfortable ballpark in the world. But I think all the nostalgia and all the appreciation of what it is and when it was built and who played there. You mentioned owners along the line. Charlie Finley, who owned the Oakland A's, actually owned Rickwood Field and made it his minor league headquarters. A lot of those players from the early 70s, and painful memories for Cincinnati Reds fans like Tony Kurre, but that great athletics teams from 72 with Catfish Hunter and Reggie Jackson and catcher Dave Duncan, Bert Campaneris. These are all guys that played here at Rickwood Field because Charlie Finley owned the stadium at the time, which is kind of remarkable. We got
those A's in 1990, though. We got them back. You talk about some of the things, and while I know we probably can't get major leaguers to wear the wool uniforms, I cannot believe that they actually wore wool uniforms back
in the middle of the summer.
Listen, it was hotter than hell back then, too. In the middle of summertime, I can't imagine that. But, I was sitting here just pulling up some of the dimensions, too, because, listen, guys are hitting 500-foot home runs right now. It's 321 down the left field line, 332 down the right, and 393 to center, straightaway center. So you may be seeing some long balls too. I don't know too many ballparks that have anything in the 300s that go straight to center field. So it's a little smaller too. But you're right. You're right on top of the action, and it is just going to be. I'm going to give anything I got. You and I definitely need to be at that ballpark for that game coming up on June 20th. Again, as we salute the Negro Leagues and the fact that Willie Mays is going to be represented there is just going to be an amazing game.
That same week, CC Sabathia, the great retired pitcher from the Indians and the Yankees, CC Sabathia is organizing a celebrity softball game, I think the night before the Major League game. It's either on Tuesday or Wednesday of that week. And he has already got commitments from many of the Major League stars of recent years to have this big event. And for just a social occasion to participate, that's where maybe casual fans should, concentrate on going, because I love what you said. Leave some space for people that love the game of baseball.
Please.
Anybody who's ever said baseball's boring, I don't watch baseball, stay away from Rickwood Field and give us people that really appreciate the game. And because I am consumed by baseball, have been all my life. I got to tell you a quick story. I told you about Joe Scott up in Memphis. Our family was invited because of his close friendship with my late father-in-law, Carol Blair, at the time. We were invited to a wonderful event. It was a historic video that had been made, a documentary about the Negro League team in Memphis all those years, the Memphis Red Sox that Joe Scott played on. And Tony, one of my favorite things in that, there was a guy named Abner Radcliffe who pitched for years in those leagues, and many of those years in Memphis. He was about 90 years old at the time. This was probably 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago now. But the movie was absolutely great. And the speakers before, a lot of the guys that were still around from those teams, Abner Radcliffe gets up and he's talking about his career, and he's, he got no teeth, and he looks every day of 90 plus. And Abner told a story that absolutely brought the house down, and I always repeat it. He said, back in the day, we played double headers most every weekend day, Saturday and Sunday. And he says, And, my nickname is Abner Double Duty Radcliffe. And a lot of people could think that that's because, I would go out on a 99-degree day in Memphis summer and pitch 9 innings in the opener and then catch 9 innings in the nightcap.
Yep.
He said, but that's not, he says, but that's not accurate. I want to set the record straight. And again, picture who's saying this, a 90-year-old guy who's broke down and can barely stand up there and talk. But he says quite clearly then, he says, people think that's where my nickname came from, Double Duty, but that's not really the case. He says that name comes from the fact that every time I walked out in the parking lot, there were 2 girls waiting on me. So, and everybody just cracked up picturing this guy in action back in the 1930s and 40s. Double Duty Radcliffe, and just a part of Americana that I hope will always be preserved. And again, honoring all those guys that played in those leagues and some of the extremely gifted players that never got a shot to play in the major leagues. I think it's just a great, appropriate situation to honor them. And Major League Baseball couldn't do that any better than putting a lot of money into the stadium and getting it spiffed up and hopefully hosting a game there every single year.
The modification has already started. It's going to take about 6 to 7 months to get it done. The game's coming up on June 20th, the Cards and the Giants. Please don't go if you're not a baseball fan. Let Kip Keefer and Tony Kurre go, and maybe you and I can play in that celebrity softball tournament. That'd be kind of fun, man.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
In fact, if anybody wants to buy tickets for that, that's fine. Just give them to Tony and I.
There you go. The Keefer and Kurre Show. You can hear it every Monday through Friday, 5 days a week on the TKR app and wherever you get your favorite podcast. We're available on every major indice out there. And, of course, also check out Kip Keefer's other show called Need to Know. Kip Keefer right here on 2 shows on Tony Kurre Radio. And don't forget, coming up on Saturday morning, another fantastic starting lineup show with Kip Keefer and Tony Kurre. We're going to have a special guest. Of course, we have clients that come in. We're going to have Terry Quillian doing her rant of the week. We have the legend doing his thing. And Case Keefer is plays in the desert. We are hotter than dirt out there, big time with our plays. So check us out again. The starting lineup is going to be happening on ABC 3340 every Saturday morning from 10:30 to 11 o'clock. Kip, thank you so much.
Birmingham, play ball.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.